Usually, at the start of a video, I'll say howdy doody to y'all, but it's September, and there's a chill in the air, so until the end of spooky season, instead of just saying hi, I'm gonna start the videos with a story. When I lived in New England, I was a graduate student, and graduate students, well, they're broke. That means no fancy dinners, no expensive vacations, but I did have one hobby that never cost me a dime: riding my bike. And a good bike, it can pretty much take you anywhere. And that anywhere was often a mountain biking area named Diamond Hill in Cumberland, Rhode Island. And the trails here, they were beautiful. There were tall pines and a few quiet streams. But best of all, you could get lost in the woods. One of my favorite things to do, especially at night. Now don't get me wrong, the woods at night, that's a little bit stupid, but honestly, if you asked me, I'd probably have admitted I liked being afraid while I rode my bike. But I usually never thought I was ever really in danger. Regardless, one October mid-afternoon, I loaded up my car and drove south to this forest, and hit the trail. It was going to be about 20 miles this day, just me, my bike, and the woods. And it was going to be great, just like all the other times. Of course, in New England in the fall, starting a bike ride in the mid-afternoon means you're going to be biking in the dark. And as such, I lost light with about 7 miles left to get back to my car. It didn't matter though. I flipped on my light and I kept pedaling in the dark. But that's about when I heard something I hadn't heard in those woods before. A branch breaking, off to the side, deep in the trees, followed by something that sounded like a really deep breath from something kind of impossibly large. I stopped. Hello? I thought, maybe, probably, that was just a deer. But then I heard that deep breath noise again. This time, it was followed by what sounded like a handful of sticks cracking all at once. Whatever was stepping around out there, my impression was it was larger than I first thought. I decided to just keep biking, even if there was something really big out there. I mean, it wouldn't be interested in me, right? What was just a couple of noises suddenly turned rapid. As I rode towards the parking lot, I swore I could hear the constant sound of leaves crunching and twigs snapping, just behind me and just beyond the tree line. I pushed harder on the pedals, the light of my bike bouncing over every bump in the trail, shadows stretching like claws across the ground, reaching towards me, and whatever this sound was, I felt like it was chasing me and getting closer, and that any second now, it was going to bust out from the tree line in front of me. And then, just to my left, I saw streetlights. There was a neighborhood nearby. And just as suddenly as I noticed those lights, those footsteps, and snapping branches, they were gone. Once again, it was just me, and the sound of my own breath, kind of ragged and wheezing now in the cool October air. And that was that. I made it back to the car, tossed my bike in the trunk, locked the doors faster than usual, and sat there for a few minutes, staring into the woods, wondering what exactly it was I experienced out there, and knowing full and well I probably just ran from the echoes of my own bike in the woods. That being said, just before I started my car, I, without any doubt, heard the echoes of a massive branch snapping in the distance. But hey, the pizza after that ride, it was the best that Mortadella Head had ever tasted. Welcome, my friends, to the community that always takes the long way home, especially when it runs straight through the woods at night. The channel that hears a strange noise in the dark and says, yeah, let's go check this out. If you don't know me, I'm T, your host, and tonight we're diving into some of the strangest, scariest, and possibly most ridiculous creatures in all of New England. And wouldn't you know it, they live right here, in the small state in the country, Rhode Island. Now listen, if you're new around here and you want to ride shotgun as we hunt down cryptids in every single state in the USA, all you've got to do is like this video, hit subscribe, and drop me a comment. That's what keeps the lights on and the shadows whispering. Otherwise, buckle up, because Rhode Island might be small, but its monsters, they're plentiful. After scripting my Rhode Island videos, I think it's safe to say that Cumberland, Rhode Island is one of the biggest surprises I've ever come across. It's filled to the brim with horror, ranging from historical and haunted places like Nine Men's Misery to a legend that may very well be the origin story of the antagonist of the famous Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. Now, this legend goes way back. The earliest supposed origin I saw was 1905, but let's be clear, this legend is intimately tied to one Camp Care Anna, a children's camp in Cumberland that was founded as a non-profit Catholic summer camp in 1937 by one Reverend Ronaldo Gaduri, and it's still operational to this day, running day and overnight sessions throughout the summer. Thus, this story probably takes place closer to the 1950s, or maybe a little bit afterwards. Here, I imagine around the campfires or in the tents after the camp counselors go to bed at night, a legend would take root. One that may very well be rooted in a real individual that possibly terrorized campers in the early years of this camp. The story goes that in the woods around this camp, a man named Freddy lived in a log cabin. He, by all accounts, was pretty normal, and he even had a wife and kids. But he did have one problem. The kids at this camp, they were pretty noisy sometimes, even well into the night, and this noisiness prevented him and his family from getting the rest they needed, and this angered Freddy over time. Eventually, the story goes that he snapped. Now, he didn't do anything drastic this time, but he did wander out to Camp Care Anna, and he found the culprits making all of this noise, giving them a piece of his mind and essentially telling them to shut up. While I would have personally talked to the management of this camp about this instead of the campers, you almost can't blame poor Freddy. He was just a guy trying to preserve the sanctity of his good night's rest. But the thing is, the kids didn't understand that, and as teenagers often do, they'll further annoy someone who's shown their annoyance, like a shark that smells blood in the water. The story says this would prompt further harassment by the teens, and that this time they'd actually wander out to Freddy's home and steal some of his belongings and vandalize his house. This, of course, led to further escalation. Freddy, you see, after this, he would fill his shotgun with rock salt, and he wouldn't hurt the teens permanently, but the next time they wandered onto his property, he was waiting, and he peppered them with salt. Something I've never heard of before, but apparently stings like you've been stung by a bee, and oh man, this was the final straw. After this, the campers from Care Anna wouldn't play nice anymore. They wouldn't simply just harass poor Freddy. They were angry, hurt, and perhaps felt justified in what they'd do next. The story goes they'd return to the cabin of Freddy, this time during the day while old Freddy was out of the home tending to his homestead, and with his family inside, they'd set fire to his cabin. Freddy, of course, would quickly catch a whiff of this house fire, but by the time he got home, it was too late. He couldn't get his family out of the fire, and in trying to do so, he'd burn his face badly and permanently. After this day, Freddy didn't just lose his appearance, though. He lost his whole family, and his home. According to the story, he was doomed after this to wander this plot of land in the woods of Cumberland, Rhode Island alone for the rest of his life. He did keep one thing, though: his disdain for the local campers. Over time, this disdain combined with Freddy's poor woodland hygiene too, you see. And Freddy, they say, grew out his nails really long while he was in these woods. He either didn't have files or clippers, or he just didn't care to use them. And after he lost his family, he didn't just go to Camp Care Anna to yell at loud teens anymore. He'd actually come out of the woods and, according to the stories, he'd claw the kids, leaving massive scratches across their chests and backs from his sharp nails. Admittedly, though, I didn't find any stories of him actually doing any more harm than that, so I guess that's kind of tame compared to burning down someone's house. You probably very well understand how this developed into the Nightmare on Elm Street antagonist Freddy Krueger at this point. This Camp Care Freddy's long nails very likely became Freddy Krueger's work glove fitted with 4 10-inch long metal blades, and his affinity for harassing kids, Wes Craven's character would happily take this disdain all the way to Springwood, Ohio in 1984, too. Admittedly, Wes Craven has never actually admitted to this, but it would be very surprising to me if his own Freddy wasn't a derivative from Rhode Island's earlier Fingernails Freddie. Oh, and while we're at it, there's one more note I want to leave you with. Some, you see, instead of calling him Fingernails Freddie, call him Hotshot, or Hot Chaw, or even Hotshot Charlie, which supposedly harks back to a real man named Charles Torrey, a man who, according to legend, really did live in the woods around Camp Care and was a real homesteader who had a cabin, a wife, and a daughter here. He also apparently had real negative run-ins with the campers of Camp Care. That being said, if you look up any Charles Torrey in Rhode Island or even nearby in Massachusetts, I, at least, wasn't able to find any census records for him, or newspaper reports tying anyone with that name to the region. Usually, seriously, you'd expect to find some mention of a local in a smaller town like this, especially if they were involved in a house fire or possibly a scuffle with local summer camp goers. That would attract the local news back in the day. Now, true or not, many folks say that in these woods of Cumberland, Freddy never actually left, and that despite his flesh and blood being gone, his spirit remains to haunt the children of modern-day Camp Care. With this in mind, let me know what you think. Have you heard of this legend? Did you camp at Camp Care? I'd love to hear more intimate takes on this legend from locals around Cumberland if you have any. In the Weird Rhode Island video, we talked a bit about your vampires, which admittedly are less vampire in the creature sense and more vampire in the ghostly consumption, undead siphoning your life sense. So I'm not sure they're actually cryptids. They're a little more ghost or just weird folklore, which is why I put them in that video. But fret not, if legend is to be believed, you good folks of Rhode Island also have some hairy boys that call your state home, and would land you square in the corner of Team Jacob back in the late 2000s. To be clear though, the werewolves that supposedly exist, they're not quite the centerpiece of this story, but they are supposedly real because of it, so I can't really leave them out. So rather than beginning with some strange episode of Lupine Fury, the story starts in the small town of Woonsocket, Rhode Island, in its Fairmont Heights section, then named Woonsocket Falls, a community largely comprised of immigrants, many of whom were French-Canadian that worked in the many mills and factories of the region. They actually, from my reading, either had the 5th or 6th largest French-speaking population in the whole of the USA at the time. This is important because, well, as we've talked about before, those of French descent would have been predisposed to knowing a thing or two about werewolves, or as they were known at the time, the loup-garou. These werewolf-like creatures were persistent in European folklore, and were often a creature you became or met with because of a curse or perhaps your own poor behavior, especially if you were Catholic, rather than something you became by happenstance, like by being scratched by one of these beasts. Also, I find this a bit scarier than your typical werewolf legend. The loup-garou didn't even need a full moon to come after you. Rather, they were more than capable of transforming on any night, regardless of the state of the moon, meaning you were always vulnerable to this curse. And this may be symbolic for these people always being vulnerable to bad behavior as a Catholic, if you know what I mean. That said, some stories do say that if you were exposed to too much moonlight, you might be especially vulnerable, so the moon was always part of this legend. But that might just be an add-on to keep people inside at night. Regardless, the story we're telling today is set in the year 1867 or 1868, just a few years before Woonsocket's incorporation as a proper city in 1871. I'm sure that long hours in the mill and the harsh conditions that came with this work in the mill made for plenty of problems in Woonsocket Falls. But among these problems, there was another not related to work, and this was that there were hardly any churches to accommodate the massive Catholic population of the community. The churches that were here were small, and often they were miles away from the communities they served. And I can't imagine, after brutal work in the factories, everyone was always eager to travel a long distance to church the next few mornings. That said, a local priest had a solution. This nameless priest, they say, would pray a bit, and then some more, and after a while, every day he would pray for one specific thing, that his community be given the time and resources to construct a church. He'd ask of this nightly too, to a monument to the Virgin Mary that he had in his home. He wanted his community of Woonsocket Falls to have a beautiful stone church. One night, the story goes though, the priest would say that while praying, he heard a voice say, "Outside in your yard tomorrow, you'll find a fine horse that can easily cart all the stone you'd ever need to build a church. He has the strength of many horses and will easily carry any load you set upon him, but under no circumstance shall you ever remove his bridle, for it is sanctified. If you remove his bridle, the horse will vanish in an instant." Now, I'm sure this was pretty surprising to hear, but the story goes that this priest followed the Virgin Mary's instruction, taking himself to bed only to awake to a horse outside of his home just as he was told. This horse was, in a way that was sort of scary even, just as promised. To start, it was strong as a handful of horses, but it also had a quirk about it that made the priest sort of uneasy. It had glowing red eyes. Regardless, it was sent by the Virgin Mary after all, and it was strong, so he put it to work. The priest would employ a foreman to begin building this large stone church, and he'd give this foreman the bridal instructions, which he would diligently follow, and the church would nearly be completed. That is, until the foreman got sick, as the church was nearly finished. He just needed a few days off, but he didn't want to delay the church's construction, so he had one of his colleagues take over for the final days of construction. Again, he gave his colleague firm instructions to never remove the bridle from this horse, even telling him that at this point the priest had become suspicious of the horse, nicknaming him Old Nick, and suspecting Old Nick might have actually been the devil himself, captured and forced to do labor by the Virgin Mary. That being said, on the final day of work, it was very hot, and if you know horses, you know that it can be a bit uncomfortable for them to take a drink when they've got their bridles on. Thus, the temporary foreman building the church would take Old Nick over to the Blackstone River for a drink, sort of near Fairmont Heights in Woonsocket, and he'd make the fateful decision to remove this horse's bridle. Of course, the response to this would be immediate. The horse, they say, let out an ear-piercing neigh, and actually kicked the temporary foreman with its hind legs into the river. Then the horse jumped across the Blackstone River, landing on a ledge which he'd split in two, creating a chasm below him that was initially full of fire. And then the horse would become something sort of demonic, and with wings, and it would vanish into the hole that he formed. Presumably, of course, a hole to hell if you can't tell. The worker, they say, was of course initially shocked, but then he started to feel, he felt off. And then he fell to the ground, and he started growling. And suddenly, he began to grow hair all over his body, and then he began to howl, running off into the wilderness. Meanwhile, of course, for some reason, the priest apparently heard all of this commotion, and so he'd venture towards the Blackstone River, only to stumble upon this newly formed dark cave with the horse's bridle lying nearby. This area quickly gained a reputation as cursed, a place that people would avoid however they could, and it was known to be a place where other horses would labor when they were near it. Further, rumors began to circle around this so-called Devil's Hole in Woonsocket, of a man-beast of sorts, initially said to be a loup-garou, roaming and terrorizing the people, and even consuming their livestock from time to time if they were left unguarded through the night. Rumors also circulated that others interested in the occult were traveling to this site, only to make their own pacts with the devil, becoming the loup-garou themselves, creating a reputation that some say sticks with this section of the Blackstone River to this day. Now, as for any veracity to these claims, admittedly, I've had trouble finding anything to support that this story actually occurred. There's no nearby remnant of an old stone church in the style you'd expect from the late 1800s. There's no modern sightings of werewolves or red-eyed horse beasts. And heck, I hate to say it, I don't even think there's an actual Devil's Hole in Woonsocket, Rhode Island that you can visit, though maybe it just isn't documented on the internet. Or maybe it's that barbershop on the east side of town named the Man Cave. Who knows? With that in mind, though, let me know down below. Have you heard this legend? Do you believe that the loup-garou still roams the forests of northern Rhode Island, and possibly even Massachusetts? As always, let me know below, especially if you have details to add to this story. There's just something about places named Glocester. They've always got something crazy going on. I've seen one with a ghost story. The one in Massachusetts has an epic sea monster tale. And of course, this one has a cryptid, and a story that involves pirates. Glocester, Rhode Island is characterized by thick forests and rolling hills, with forests including the Sprague Farm Town Forest, which encompasses nearly 100 acres of dense woodland. And with dense forests like that in modern day, it's no surprise that some have thought to themselves that something might be hiding in them, and that is exactly where this story leaves off. See, in 1839, one Albert Hicks noted something, let's say interesting, was going on here. And yes, this is the same Albert Hicks that was the last man ever executed for piracy in the USA. As for Hicks' history, Hicks was born in Foster, Rhode Island in 1820, and his one ambition in life was to become rich, once even saying that the only value his wealth would have was to gratify his passions with no restraint. As for crews, well, let's just say Hicks would have fit in better with Blackbeard than the Straw Hats. He was a bad guy, to put it lightly, and upon his capture, he'd ultimately confess that he felt the devil actually protected him while he performed heinous acts, saying verbatim, "He has stood by me all my life, on ship and on shore, amid the howling storms of the ocean, where every moment the waves threaten to engulf me. He has snatched me from their deadly embrace. On the battlefield, in many a hand-to-hand fight, he has seemed to stand by my side, protecting me from danger, and when I have been in the hands of my enemies, and escape has appeared impossible, he has, until now, invariably opened the way for my release, almost painting him like an old friend. Perhaps it's only appropriate that a man of this character would himself claim to see the devil in Rhode Island. See, while living in Foster, Rhode Island, Hicks was often told stories of fellow pirates that called New England and Rhode Island home. Specifically, he was told stories of Captain Kidd, and the accompanying legend that somewhere along the East Coast, Kidd's treasure, a mighty haul of gold and silver, was buried. Now, tales of this treasure dot the coasts from North Carolina to New Jersey and all the way up to Maine, but in this version, the gold was apparently buried somewhere on the Page farm, a farm whose location is now lost to time. Regardless, he claimed he was told that Spanish doubloons were found on the farm while the owner was digging, and he became convinced there was more to this story. Thus, Hicks and 3 other Gloucester residents convened, and decided they'd begin to dig on this farm for Captain Kidd's forgotten treasure, entering the farm property with shovels, picks, and all the works under the cover of night on a cool New England fall night. That said, the fates were not on this side this evening, as the 4 dug into the ground, striking rocks and roots. As if disturbing some ancient evil, they were interrupted by a strange sound. And this strange sound eventually gave way to a face. A creature approached them, something that Hicks described as big as a cow, with a body covered in rattling scales. It had bat-like wings, spiral horns as white as stovepipes, and eyes that glowed like fiery orbs that were as big as pewter bowls. Then the creature approached the pirates, shooting flames out of its mouth and nose, actually burning the brush around it according to the witnesses. Then, of course, as quickly as this beast had arrived, it ran off into the night. Hicks would say of this, he thought he'd encountered the devil himself, and after being spared by this beast, the 4 would also take this chance to leave these grandiose dreams of buried treasure behind right then and there on the Page farm. For a man that said the devil was like an old friend to him, it's awfully telling to see how he reacted to actually possibly seeing him. Regardless, while this was the last Albert Hicks would see of this creature, it wasn't the last time it would ever be observed. According to locals, this creature might have awakened in 1839, but it stuck around far longer. For instance, in 1896, Gloucester resident Neil Hopkins told a tale of sighting this beast to the Evening Hour newsprint. This story recounted a cold winter evening on January 13th of 1896, and Neil, while coming home from work in Putnam, Connecticut, on roads he knew very well, got a bad feeling as he walked across the darkest portion of his route home, and then he heard a sound coming from the forest. Something was running towards him, and then, out of nowhere, this creature that was, according to him, as large as an elephant, came out of the darkness and began to give chase to him. Whatever this was, according to Neil, it looked to be on fire, and it had painfully hot breath, so hot that even from a distance it hurt when it puffed fire out of its nose. It also made a sort of metallic sound that, according to Neil, sounded like steel against steel. Of course, just as the creature neared Neil, it must have felt merciful because it ran off into the woods. Neil and other locals after this quickly realized this might have been the burning beast that was seen 57 years ago. To this day, there are less well-realized supposed sightings of this beast too, many of them from cars, and a few in the 1900s that similarly tell of a large creature giving chase to men, but deciding at the last moment to inexplicably let them go. As for why this large flaming beast decides never to take a life, I can't personally say, but if it's still out there, I personally recommend against trying to find it. Now, as for what this creature is, well, there are theories. Some, of course, think that old Hicks might have had something we refer to as an edible these days, or that maybe he munched on a special variety of mushroom, and that when a cow walked by, he might have gotten a little bit excited. Others, of course, put forward that this creature is supernatural, possibly even the creation of cultists or dark magic cast by Captain Kidd's pirate crew to defend their long-lost buried treasure. I, for one, think it's the Demogorgon's cousin, the Demi-Cow, and that this flaming cow just slips in and out of our dimension, evading capture and simultaneously scaring humans every 30 or so years. As for the reality, though, Hicks probably just saw a bear, and that bear sighting played beautifully with his guilty conscience while he was digging on someone else's farm. Whatever you believe, this creature, coined the Glocester Ghoul, has become a local fixture of campfire stories, a boogeyman of sorts to frighten kids. Heck, he's even a bit of a mascot, with Gloucester businesses incorporating him into their brands, and they even put him on t-shirts. In short, this monster has become a source of local pride, and there's nothing I quite like a scary creature of old becoming a modern-day mascot. Anyways, you know what to do. Let me know down below if you've seen him, or let me know down below if you are him. I'd love to chat with you. It's been a little while since we covered a state with a proper traditional American Sasquatch, but if you were craving a sight of size 19 shoes, Rhode Island has you covered with its aptly named Big Rhodey. Now, unlike the other creatures on this list, Big Rhodey isn't exactly isolated to a single location. As crazy as it sounds, he's been seen everywhere from Cumberland to Gloucester to populated areas like Providence and Newport. I was really hoping I was going to find someone that claimed they saw Big Rhodey in one of the mansions looking out the windows in Newport like some sort of low-budget horror film that's big twist as the haunted mansion isn't actually haunted, but that Bigfoot lives in it. But sadly, I didn't find that reward. Regardless, some even say he's the same large hairy creature that calls the Bridgewater Triangle of Massachusetts home. As for evidence of Big Rhodey, it's principally in the form of one-off sightings, footprints, and also a slightly more Pacific Northwesty Bigfoot trait of folks finding small trees snapped clear to their trunk with big footprints surrounding this scene, and often clumps of hair too. I don't know the name for this phenomenon of fallen trees that appear to be torn down in a tantrum by Bigfoot, but it's rare you see this mentioned east of the Rocky. Some even claim to hear tree knocking, which is exactly what it sounds like. Folks claim that if you hear rhythmic thumping coming from the woods at night, sort of a low knocking sound coming from a woodland area, it's a clear sign of Big Rhodey, and that this knocking is a form of communication between big-footed boys that they use to communicate over longer distances. As for sightings of note, perhaps the most noteworthy is a video of Big Rhodey that shows someone or something that's brown and very hairy and slightly hunched over come out from behind a tree, and then walk deeper into the woods. Now, on the video, you can't really see it, but those who witnessed it claim it had a sloped forehead, and I even saw some posit that it looked like a Neanderthal, which, hey, that's very insulting to the 1 to 4% of your genome, and you should take that back. Others even suggested it looked like, I quote, a feral human. Anyways, if you want to liken this to something we've seen before, think of it as being similar to the Sykesville Monster from Maryland, something akin to early man living in the woods of Rhode Island rather than Bigfoot. At least as it's portrayed in this video. Other portrayals paint it very differently. As for any actual credence, well, let's be clear, it's pretty limited, but that didn't stop the show Finding Bigfoot from visiting these parts in Season 2, Episode 2 to look for Big Rhodey in person. And while I definitely get a good laugh at shows like this, they actually did a pretty decent job of finding people that claimed to see the old foot himself. For instance, they talked with a local that while riding his bicycle, the poor guy got chased by, I quote, a white Bigfoot that then jumped over a rock wall and ran away. Bigfoot apparently chased the man for about 5 to 10 seconds and then gave up because he was fast on a bicycle and he ran off. The man actually didn't really characterize it as Bigfoot, but rather called it a gorilla or something. That's a direct quote. But Finding Bigfoot took this description and went wild, so Bigfoot it is, I guess. I suppose Bigfoot was hanging out in the suburbs this day. Also, interestingly, the Finding Bigfoot team explained the white hair on this ape as just being an older Bigfoot, speculating that maybe their hair turns white as they age just like humans. Well, alrighty then, whatever you say. They also met with a nice guy named Bill that came across Bigfoot tracks, and he literally dug these tracks right out of the ground and still had them to show the TV programming, which, candidly, that's exactly what you should be doing if you find evidence like this. Don't screw around and pee on the tracks, collect it, and keep it pristine. Of course, the Finding Bigfoot team did, test to see if they could recreate the stride, and these people, humans, were able to recreate the stride. And then they actually saw if they could recreate the depth, and they could recreate the depth, which sort of indicates that whatever made these footprints weighed a similar amount as a human and took a similar stride length to a human. But hey, regardless, the team thought it was definitely Sasquatch. So again, we're going to go with alrighty then on this one. Big Rhodey seems to be well loved across Rhode Island, and those are the most prominent stories I could find about him. Big Rhodey, if you're out there and you watch YouTube, please comment and let me know. I'd love to give you an interview and get your side of these stories. Of course, you can't be a coastal state without a sea monster, and the aptly named Loch Ness of Block Island is Rhode Island's own Nessie. Scary as it is, if you asked most non-New Englanders, they'd probably admit they'd never heard of Block Island. And from my reading online, it almost seems like Block Island natives and locals sort of think of their little island as separate from the mainland of Rhode Island anyways. Block Island is 14 miles off the coast of Rhode Island, and it's named for Adrian Block, a 1600s Dutch explorer who first charted the island. Historically, the island's isolation shaped a very distinct identity. Originally, it was home to the Narragansett people, and it was later settled by the Europeans in the 1600s and became known for its maritime culture. Fishing, whaling, and shipwrecks, they were all a part of life here. By the 19th century, the island was reinventing itself as a summer destination, though, with grand Victorian hotels popping up along its bluffs and beaches to rival Martha's Vineyard's attractions. And today, that legacy still defines Block Island. It's a place that thrives on tourism, but also fiercely guards its small-town offbeat character. It's not just a getaway spot, but a piece of living history, a blend of old New England grit and modern seaside charm, with a streak of independence that makes it feel like its own little world. And just off the coast of Block Island, something interesting happened back in the summer of 1996. See, on June 27th of 1996, there was a fishing boat trolling its waters named the Mad Monk, and fishermen J.T. Penny and Gary Hall were aboard. They'd pull up their nets this afternoon, but inside of them was something that wasn't normal. Gary Hall, you see, was looking over the side of the ship, and he noticed that something strange was being pulled up alongside the fish they'd caught. This thing was largely bone. They weren't quite sure what it was, thinking at first it might have just been the skeleton of an oarfish or something similar. But at least to these seasoned fishermen, it wasn't an oarfish, or really anything else they'd ever seen before. Whatever it was, my impression is that before their boat was even docked, J.T. Penny was calling it the Ness Monster. They brought the skeleton and they set it on the nearby breakwater, and this actually gave locals, besides them, an opportunity to see the creature and take pictures of it for the 2 days that they left it there. Over this time, too, the creature gained attention. Locals were interested in it, but this interest quickly extended to regional universities. For instance, the University of Rhode Island took a liking to the creature and even wanted it, and actually the London School of Science even flew someone out to take a look at it. From what I can tell, neither of these institutions ever definitively said anything about the skeleton, and J.T. Penny ended up giving it to his friend Lee Scott, a biologist for the state of New York, because, well, it's pretty practical. Scott was the only person JT knew that had a freezer large enough to hold these 13 feet of bones. Therefore, he won the skeleton lottery. But quickly following this, rumors that at this point were false started to spread, claiming someone had stolen the Ness Monster skeleton. Of course, again at this point this was false. It was safely stored in Scott's freezer, until they figured out what to do with it at least. But that whole figuring it out part didn't come fast enough. In a conspiratorial moment that would fill any Hollywood blockbuster with intrigue, Lee Scott, the guy who was storing the skeleton, over the winter, you see, he would pass away. And then when J.T. Penney went to his home to retrieve the skeleton, as you might expect, it was nowhere to be found. Also, to make this extra strange, apparently J.T. was the one who owned the lock and had the key to the lock, and that lock was still firmly shut on the freezer when he arrived. So basically, in the blink of an eye, the only proof of this famous Rhode Island cryptid other than the photos that were taken, a potential saltwater relative to the Loch Ness Monster and Champ, was suddenly gone without a trace. In the over 20 years since it went missing, there's not been a single trace of it either. So I suppose that leaves us with two thoughts. Number one, where in the world is the skeleton of the Loch Ness Monster? And number two, if there was one Loch Ness Monster, perhaps there's more. As of now, though, there's been no trace of the Loch Ness Monster skeleton online, nor has anyone really seen a Loch Ness Monster in the wild. So we're gonna have to wait on both of these. Unless, of course, you consider that weird old Mother Ocean video that occurred in Rhode Island, a sighting of the Loch Ness Monster, which, if you haven't seen the video titled Mother Ocean, you should go check it out right after this video. And if you have seen it, let me know down below if you think this was the same sort of creature. As for any debunking to be done here, well, there is a little bit more to this story. To start, I heard an interview with J.T. Penney about this, and he didn't sound like anything other than a hard-working, genuine guy. That being said, he did quickly capitalize on the Loch Ness Monster, making and selling t-shirts, something he continues to do from his store Mahoney's Clothier on Block Island, a place where a lot of Loch Ness merchandise is sold to this day. That said, again, the Loch Ness skeleton was very, very real. It wasn't a hoax. And frankly, you're not going to get rich off of t-shirts, so I don't think JT did anything purposeful to make this case blow up the way it did. Further, as for what some people think the Loch Ness Monster really may have been, well, some scientists that took a look at its remains, at least in the photographs, say the answer was simple, and maybe not so exciting after all. They say it's the remains of a basking shark, just, of course, lacking a substantial amount of its components by the time it was picked up by the Mad Monk. Admittedly, this sort of makes sense. There are a ton of basking sharks in the waters around Block Island. That being said, if you look at the skeletons of basking sharks and you look at this skeleton, it feels like there's some stuff missing, and maybe some stuff, including the head, or what I'm interpreting to be the head, is kind of the wrong side. It's not as wide as it is in this photo of a basking shark, but maybe I'm misjudging this. Even despite this, personally, I find the whole skeleton went missing after its owner passed away thing pretty darn fishy, so I'm not entirely settled on this. Anyways, if you've seen a sea monster around Block Island, or maybe just off the coast of Rhode Island, and it matches either this description that I've told here, or maybe the thing in Mother Ocean, which again you should go check out after this, let me know down below. I would love to hear your story. Rhode Island. Who would have thought that a state that's barely larger than Jacksonville, Florida has everything from Bigfoot to a Loch Ness equivalent to the inspiration for Freddy Krueger? I had an absolute blast with this one, and I hope you did too. Anyways, as always, if you had a good time with this, let me know in the comments. And please, please, please sub and like the video if you want to keep this channel chugging along. Also, if you clicked that little thumbs up button down below, it would be really swell. Otherwise, as for what's next, I think we'll settle in for a final weird folklore video before we enter the month of October, when we're going to be covering all ghosts all the time for the next month. And hopefully, if my life can stay in one piece, we'll be putting out 2 videos a week for T Storytime's most haunted month of the year, our Season of Spirits, where you'll get everything from tales of your state's most haunted places to real-life investigations into some of my local urban legends. Trust me, you'll want to be around for that. And with all of this in mind, whether you just saw a fire-breathing cow in the pasture near your home, or if you fell asleep and had a dream of the farmer that owned that cow with really, really long fingernails, don't you ever forget, it's always story time.